We are particularly delighted to welcome everyone here this morning for this presentation, which comes to you from London, England. And I'm pleased to see that Rabbi David has been able to join us. Rabbi David is the Executive Director of Aisha Torah, and we are very happy and proud to be co-hosting this program today with Aisha Torah. So thank you for joining us, Rabbi, and please would you do the honors of introducing our guest.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure because I was trying to change the name from my wife to me, and for some reason I can't.
Rabbi David, your microphone's off.
Now you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that again. So I really appreciate the Merowitz Center and Steve Cohn for making this happen and for the partnership that we have in this special event. The speaker today, who's talking about something that I think is very important for our time, is Dr. Leslie Gutmann, who's originally from Houston, Texas. So although she's with us from England, she's definitely a former Yankee, and we'll accept her as such. She did undergraduate studies at Tulane University and graduate studies at the University of Michigan. And currently she's associate professor in the Department of Clinical Educational Health Psychology and director of the MSc Behavior Change at University College London. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I recognize it as being something that's pretty important. I'm sure we'll get more of it as she presents. And her upcoming book, Resilience, A Jewish Guide to Facing Setbacks, Fostering Strength and Living Your Best Life, focuses on the major life tests that many of us face. So I think that I've also recognized her name from some of her presentations on Aish.com. On her, she writes articles for Aish.com, and I'm very happy that you're here to be with us, and I look forward to your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi David, for that kind introduction. I'm really so grateful to be speaking with you all today in St. Louis and elsewhere from my own home here in London. And in the next hour or so, I'm going to talk to you about resilience. So much of my talk is based on my upcoming book, and it's entitled Resilience, A Jewish Guide to Facing Setbacks, Fostering Strength, and Living Your Best Life. And writing this book represents the fulfillment of a long-awaited aspiration for me. In fact, this book was more than 10 years in the making, and it bridges together my love of Judaism with my academic work on resilience. So I wrote this book to help readers chart a more resilient path. And actually, I wrote it prior to the pandemic, but now, we're facing so many challenges. It's really necessary to bolster our own resilience and that of our loved ones. And I look forward to really sharing some key points from my book, as well as some practical strategies. And I hope today that my talk will offer you some insight into your own incredible capacity for resilience. Next slide, please. There's a Jewish belief that everyone has their own pekala. Now, pekala is a Yiddish word for baggage. In fact, we're born with two sets of baggage. In the first set, they're all the tough times, the adversities, and the hardships that we face in our lifetime. In the second set, however, it's filled with all those advantages, the talents, and the abilities that were given in order to endure all those challenges in the first set of baggage. And we're told that each person's pekala is tailor-made for them. So there's nothing in that first set of baggage that you cannot handle. But at the same point in time, each of those challenges has the potential to bring out a better version of you. Now, that first set of first set of baggage filled with all of our hardships, it's opened for us. But that second set filled with all of our strengths, we need to open. And that is resilience. Resilience is opening that second set of baggage and discovering all those amazing strengths, some of them which you didn't even know you had. And it's these strengths that enable you to adapt and grow from adversity. So in my talk today, I'm going to unpack the concept of resilience a little bit more. But now I want you to engage in a writing exercise. And I know Susan asked you to have please paper and pen because it's best to write your thoughts down. Next slide, please. So I want you to reflect on a stressful and difficult situation that you overcame recently in your life. Now, it's really important to focus on a circumstance that was really challenging, even game-changing. So, don't think about the time that you got a parking ticket or maybe you burnt the roast on Rosh Hashanah. Instead, think about an event that really shook you to the core of your being. And perhaps, you or someone you love was really unwell. Perhaps you had a difficult argument with someone that's really important to you, and there was some sort of separation, or perhaps you experienced a significant downturn in your work. So I want you to think about what helped you overcome this situation and note down some thoughts to the questions I'm going to pose to you right now. So I want you to first think about, what did you do that helped yourself? Maybe you have a strong sense of your own abilities and this really carried you through. Or maybe you gave yourself a break and you said, it's okay. I'm human. I made a mistake. I'll do better next time. Or maybe you're really pragmatic and you gathered all the information you could and you sought out the best possible solution and then you implemented it. Or maybe you have a strong sense of hope or a sense of faith and really that helped you. So now I want you to think about the significant people in your life. What did they do to help you? So maybe your family rallied around you and provided you with emotional and practical support. Maybe you have one or two really good friends and that you could talk to them and they listened to you without judgment. Or maybe your community was a big support at this time and they offered you help, such as making you meals and that kind of thing. So now I want you to focus on what was unhelpful during this time. Maybe you felt really insecure about your ability to cope, or maybe you have a critical voice in your head and that's setting you back, the one that keeps kind of reminding you of all the mistakes that you made. Or maybe you just distracted yourself with some pretty unhealthy habits. Or maybe your family wasn't really able to support you in the way you needed, or maybe you have a friendship that, was really difficult or even toxic at this time. So now I want you to think about what you learned. Did you uncover any hidden talents that you didn't know you had before? Or maybe you gained a deeper sense of gratitude or a sense of spirituality. Or maybe you discovered a new life goal or a positive new direction. Or maybe your relationships with others, those became enriched, or maybe you developed new relationships. So I hope that's given you enough time to write a few thoughts or maybe keep a few thoughts in your head. And I want you to put down what you've written and set it aside for later, because we're going to revisit it at the end of our session. Okay? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let's get started. Let's begin with the basics and unpack some of the misconceptions that surround resilience. So if you use a search engine and you look for the definition of resilience, you'll find words like toughness, recovering quickly, and bouncing back. Now, I don't know about you, but this reminds me of a racquetball. You know the one, you throw it hard against the wall, and it bounces right back to you, and it looks exactly the same as it did before. It might have a little dust on it, you wipe it off, but that's not the way that it works for us humans when we experience hardship. When we hit against something hard, we do not stay the same. We fundamentally change with the experience, and we have the ability to learn, to grow, and rebuild. Resilience is not about being invulnerable to pain. Adversity hurts. It's not about forgetting heartbreaks and dismissing sorrows. It's about integrating these experiences into our new reality and creating a sense of oneness. It's about adapting and becoming stronger. Our trials have not broken us, they've formed us into stronger and wiser people. And in this way, resilience is not about bouncing back into who we were before. It's about bouncing forward into who we can become. Next slide, please. Also, resilience is not a trait or an attribute or anything that we're born with for that matter. It's not something that some of us have and others don't. Resilience is something that's made. It's a set of skills that we can learn and develop. Also, resilience is not a destination. It's not like learning to ride a bike. It's not like getting a medal in a competition. Resilience is a journey. It's a journey that we take throughout our lifetimes, transforming setbacks into new opportunities and new pathways. And like a muscle, we have to continually work on and build up our resilience so we can handle any challenge that comes our way. Next slide, please. Third, resilience is not about being a superhero. We hear the most incredible stories of people experiencing the most difficult hardships, and we think to ourselves, that is extraordinary. I could never do that. But here's the secret. You can. What is the most important takeaway message from decades of studies on resilience is this. People show the most astonishing resistance, recovery, and resilience in the face of the most challenging and traumatic adversities. The human capacity to recover and grow after traumatic events is far greater than any of us realize. It's not easy, but we can all do it. We can train ourselves to be more resilient through our feelings, our thoughts, and our actions, as well as our relationships with others. Next slide, please. And so just to sum up, resilience is about adapting to and integrating new circumstances into our lives. It's not about being invulnerable. It's about bouncing forward into the person that we're meant to be. It's not bouncing backward into our former self. It's about taking a journey of learning and growing throughout our lifetime. And it's not about reaching a destination. And lastly, resilience is the norm. It's not the exception. We all have the capacity for resilience. Next slide, please. The concept of resilience is something that's inherent in our Jewish way of life. In fact, Rabbi Moshe Luzzatto, known as the Ramchal, born in 1701 and a great Jewish philosopher, writer, and Kabbalist, said that everything in life serves as a challenge to test and elevate us. We can gain some insight into what Ramchal is telling us by analyzing the Hebrew word for tests. The Hebrew word for tests is nisayon, and its Hebrew root is nes, and nes means banner and miracle. Now, you probably know that everything in the Hebrew language means something. There is no coincidences. Every word reveals the essence of the item it describes. So, what do banner and miracle have to do with our life tests? Well, first of all, what's a banner? A banner is basically a big sign that carries an important message. What about a miracle? A miracle is a reminder that God rules the world. There are miracles around us at every moment: the setting of the sun, the birth of a baby. And with COVID, we learned that our breathing is a miracle. So, yet we take these miracles for granted. We're so accustomed to them that we live almost completely oblivious to them. But Judaism teaches us that each of us have a special role in this world. You have your own unique mission that only you can fulfill. But in our lives, we reach stumbling blocks. We feel stuck. We're unable to move forward. But when we experience something traumatic, everything changes. Traumatic events challenge our assumptions of who we are and our place in this world. They force us to change our thoughts and our behaviors. Our life tests break those barriers that stand in our way and bring out capacities in us that otherwise would have remained dormant. We can remember Joseph, who, through years of slavery and imprisonment, developed his spiritual potential and became the second most powerful person in Egypt after Pharaoh. Or what about Esther? She was, through her forced marriage to the king, she became the queen of Persia. And with her own courage and fortitude, her position allowed her to save the entire Jewish people from death and destruction. Their greatest challenges enabled them to become who they were meant to be and accomplish their unique mission in this world. We too can triumph over our tests. We have the capacity to triumph over our tests and be uplifted like a spiritual banner. And this is our miracle. We can change the world for the better through our own resilience. Next slide. So, what enables our resilience? Well, psychological research highlights 3 sets of factors that's been shown to foster resilience and protect us from the negative effects of adversity. And this includes personal strengths, such as believing in your own capabilities, viewing your life through a positive mindset, coping with your problems in an active way, and having a strong faith and feelings of hope, among many other personal strengths that I discuss in my book. There's also family strengths. And, for example, this includes having a secure and stable family relationship, being able to communicate with your family and having a strong sense of family identity, among many other important family strengths. And lastly, there's external support systems. And this includes having friends that you can rely on and who inspire you and support you, and feeling like a larger part of a community, and also spending time in nature. So, what you'll notice is that these are not remarkable factors. These are regular characteristics and experiences that can be found in some degree in most people and in most families. What this tells us is that building up our resilience is fundamentally human. And what I mean by that is resilience is all about recognizing and supporting our own growth as humans and building our connections with others and the wider world. What's also important to emphasize is that these factors are not show-stopping, one-time displays of greatness. We can't say, I spent time with you on your birthday in 2012. Wasn't that enough? No, our strengths are practices that we have to engage in on a daily basis. And these experiences compound and build over time. We can't build resilience based on a single or infrequent experience. Our own personal strengths and our relationships with others must be continually reinforced, renewed, and maintained. There are so many different pathways to resilience. So research finds that different strengths are important for different people at different times. And when we're facing a trauma that's uncontrollable, unforeseen, and unalterable, then research finds that finding meaning in that event and having a strong sense of faith and hope is really important. But when we're facing shorter term and more manageable situations that are difficult, then something like problem solving is more relevant. There's no single magic formula that for resilience that works for everybody in every situation. What's especially important is to reflect on your own situation and consider, what do I need at this point in time? And in my book, I discuss more than 24 different strengths, and each have several different practices or exercises that you can do to build up that strength within yourself and build up your resilience. But in my talk today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of 4 of these strengths. And I'm going to give you one practice to help you build up this strength. And I hope that this will be helpful for you, especially now during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So the first strength I want to talk about is a personal strength, and that's self-compassion. And what does self-compassion mean? Well, self-compassion means that you truly accept yourself as an imperfect human being. And self-compassion is not the same thing as self-esteem. It's not thinking positively about yourself or liking yourself because you have certain traits or certain qualities. Self-compassion means that you accept yourself 100% just because of your intrinsic worth as a human being. And when you're self-compassionate, you view your mistakes as part of the larger human experience. You know, when you're going through a tough time, you offer yourself kindness and understanding rather than recrimination, just as you would for a good friend. Self-compassion is especially important right now during the pandemic. You know, many of us are facing really difficult times right now, and our lives don't reflect our hopes or our aspirations. Our houses are not going to be super clean and organized right now. You know, we might not be able to exercise, for example, as often as we did before, and our workload might be falling behind. And, you know, we might not be the most engaging parent or grandparent right now. And, you know, sometimes we might feel pretty lousy and miserable. But when we're self-compassionate, we avoid impossibly high self-expectations and we accept our own imperfections. And this acceptance helps us to keep our stress levels down. This is so important for our mental health, and especially during difficult periods like the one we're experiencing. So I know what some of you are probably thinking right now. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, can't you be too self-compassionate? I mean, won't you become self-indulgent, unmotivated, or even lazy? But in fact, research suggests this isn't the case. Research finds that people who are more self-compassionate tend to have even greater personal initiative to make necessary and positive life changes. And what do you think the reason for that is? Well, think about it. If you're self-compassionate, you don't berate yourself when you fail. You don't struggle in the face of imperfection and outright failure, which, you know, we all experience from time to time. We're human. We make mistakes. But when you're self-compassionate, you accept failure as part of a learning process. And at the same time, and here is the crucial part, you reflect on what can I do differently next time? And you adjust your tactics, and then you try again. Self-compassion is not an excuse or a rationalization. It's an acceptance that your life is not about perfection. It's about learning and growing. It's about moving forward to what is healthy and what is positive. Now, being self-compassionate is encouraged in Judaism. As Ramban says, he who bestows good on his own soul is a man of loving kindness. In Judaism, a key part of our life is to learn from our mistakes, to try harder, and to consistently work on being better people. We can only do that by accepting our errors and understanding them, but not being defeatist. Instead, these mistakes are opportunities for growth. And on Yom Kippur, for example, we examine our misdeeds and we reflect on our behavior over the last year. And we're focused on teshuvah. And teshuvah means to return. We strive to return to who we really are, and that is like God. We are created in God's image, and goodness is at the core of our being. We make mistakes, but those mistakes do not define us. They do not constitute who we are. When we reflect and we regret our misdeeds on Yom Kippur, we're given a clean slate. And this paves the way for positive growth and new beginnings. There are many ways to encourage self-compassion, and I include quite a few different ways in my book. But one evidence-based way is positive self-talk. Now, did you ever notice that we have this running dialogue in our head all day long? Stop for a moment and listen to yours. What does your inner voice say to you? Make sure that voice in your head encourages you and supports you. You know, so often we're waiting to hear those validating statements that we so need to hear from our spouses, our friends, our family. But why wait? You can be your own cheerleader. Look in the mirror and say aloud to yourself all those statements that you need to hear. You're doing all right. You can do it. Keep trying. You are still working on that and you will get there. Or even, I accept you and I love you. We can also encourage self-compassion by reminding ourselves that we have a special purpose. You know, so often we judge ourselves by our physical presence and our worldly accomplishments, but we are so much more than that. We are spiritual beings. New slide, please. So another important personal strength that I want to talk to you about today is called learned optimism. And this is a habit of viewing ourselves and the world in a positive light. And it's the belief that good things will happen to us and our challenges are temporary. This contrasts with learned helplessness. And you might have heard about learned helplessness from early and, may I add, quite unethical experiments with dogs. Now, these experiments found that dogs who were exposed to repeated electrical shocks and prong collars or even force, they'd start to emotionally shut down and they reached a state of learned helplessness. And these poor dogs wouldn't even try to escape when they were shocked, and they became completely passive, even when there was escape route available. Now, in a similar way, people can also become learned helpless, especially when we're faced with continuous negative circumstances and we see no end in sight. We can believe that nothing will make a difference and this situation is permanent. So we stop trying and we accept this difficult situation, even when we have the ability to do something about it, even when we have the ability to make a change. What's important to know is that learned optimism and learned helplessness are learned thought processes. So in other words, we can learn them and we can unlearn them. And research finds that even those people who are pessimistic can learn to have a more optimistic and positive outlook on life. In the Mishnah, the ability to develop a positive outlook is referred to as an ayin tova, and this literally means a good eye. The significance of an ayin tova teaches us that we can train ourselves. We can train ourselves to see the good in people and in the good in situations. And having a positive outlook is especially important to bolster our resilience when we're facing difficult times. So, how do you know if you're a learned optimist or not? Well, you can start by thinking about your explanatory style. Now, what I mean by explanatory style is how you interpret and explain events that happen to you in your life. So, according to Martin Siegelman, and he's considered the father of positive psychology, and he actually developed the idea of learned optimism and did a lot of those experiments on those poor dogs, in the beginning on learned helplessness. And he says you can analyze your explanatory style according to 3 Ps. Did I tell, what slide is on right now? Sorry. Okay, good. Just making sense, sure. And you can explain your explanatory style according to 3 Ps, and that's personal, pervasive, and permanent. So personal is when you see an event as having an internal cause, and pervasive is believing that that kind of event happens in all areas of your life. And permanent, well, that means that never changes, doesn't it? So someone with a pessimistic outlook would explain bad events as their own fault and something that happens in all areas of their lives and it's permanent. Let me give you an example. So let's say that you're on the cell phone and you're driving, and the person in front of you brakes suddenly, and boom, you hit the back of that car. Now think for a moment. How would you explain that event if it happened to you in your own head? Someone who leaned toward learned helplessness might say, I was not driving carefully. I'm a really careless person. And this kind of thing, it happens to me all the time. Personal, pervasive, and permanent. What about someone who leaned toward being a learned optimist? And they might see this bad event in a completely different light. They might say, oh, well, that person, they kept calling me while I was driving, so I had to get the phone, and I was momentarily distracted. But next time I'm definitely using my headset. So impersonal, applicable to that specific event, and impermanent. So what about a good event? Well, we'd expect to see the opposite explanatory style. So someone who's learned helpless would see a good event as impersonal, specific, and impermanent, while someone who is a learned optimist would see the same event as personal, pervasive, and permanent. Let me give you another example. Let's say you apply for a new job and you're given a job offer. What would you say to yourself? A person who leaned toward learned helplessness might say, no one else applied for that job who was qualified. Right place, right time. I was really fortunate and hopefully I won't mess up. Impersonal, specific to that situation, and impermanent. What about a learned optimist? They might say, you know what? I'm the best person for this job. I really try hard at everything I do, and that's why I'm so successful. Personal, pervasive, and permanent. So how can you use this research to help you to be more resilient? Well, think about the next time that something really challenging happens to you and consider your own explanatory style. If you're leaning towards pessimism, then switch it around. Instead of focusing on the situation as being personal, pervasive, or permanent, change your interpretation so it's impersonal, specific to that situation only, and impermanent. And the same holds true for a good event. So focus on your personal role in that good event. Think about how it applies to other areas of your life and look at it as something that will be lasting. New slide, please. Another important personal strength for resilience is mindfulness. Now, mindfulness practice is a way that we regulate our thoughts and our emotions through our actions. And when we learn to be mindful, we can identify those non-productive thought patterns and the negative emotions that we have, and we could redirect them in a healthy and more positive way. You know, sometimes we catastrophize, and this is when we focus on the worst case scenario for any given situation. Or sometimes we get stuck on a recurring thought and it just goes like a loop in our head and we, can't get rid of it. Or, we feel that familiar panic that rises in your chest and kind of gets stuck here in your throat. But being mindful is about recognizing these thoughts and labeling these emotions, but learning to let them go. There's a lot of different mindfulness practices, and I include more than half a dozen in my book. But here's one that I personally find really helpful, and I use it quite a bit, and I really want to share it with you. So I want you, let's try it today together. So I want you to think about a thought or an emotional situation that took a hold of you recently. You might be upset about something that you don't want to be, and you're fighting with that emotion. Or maybe you're thinking about something that you really just don't want to think about anymore, but you can't suppress it. You're trying to, but it just keeps popping back in your head. All this fighting with our thoughts and suppressing our emotions, it's really, really draining and exhausting. And, instead of doing that, because it takes up so much energy, we can acknowledge these thoughts, we can acknowledge these emotions, and then we can separate ourselves from them. So again, think back to that difficult thought or that nagging emotion, and I want you to imagine it not in your head and not in your heart, but in your hands. So open up your hands and see that worry or that thought in your hands. Now, I want you to close your fist tight. And then you can lift up your hands and you can open your fist. And you can watch that emotion or that thought float away like a butterfly or a bee or a bird or a plane, whatever is important for you or feels good. And if you want to, you can even open up the window and let it fly out. But don't leave yet. Don't do that quite yet. And these thoughts and these emotions, they might return. And that's okay because you can release them again. And then, or you can say right aloud to yourself, you know what, thank you, thought, or thank you, emotion, but I don't need you anymore. And you can learn to let it go. I'll pass this time. Now you can't just imagine this in your head. You have to really do this action. And I promise you, it really works. So just try it and see next time you feel stuck on emotion and you can't get it to go or in a thought. And this mindfulness practice, what it teaches us is it teaches us that our emotions and our thoughts, they come and go. And in fact, new research shows that we have 6,200 different thoughts in our head every day. But it doesn't matter because our thoughts don't need to control us. We can control our thoughts. And when we let our negative emotions and our thoughts go, we have more room for positive thoughts and positive emotions. Being mindful coincides with the Jewish conception of time. And sometimes we feel like our lives are going in circles without moving forward. And this is particularly true right now because those key events that mark our days, that mark our weeks and our months are often absent right now. We're not going to big weddings. We're not going to bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. We're not having parties. We're not going on those big trips. And some people remarked that, it seems like every day is kind of like the next. But our sages teach us this is not the case. We might experience similar events in time, but each moment has a unique spiritual energy, which allows us to achieve what is needed at that particular point in time. And rather than being circular, these moments are actually a spiral. They link upward and upward, circling higher and higher to greater spiritual elevation and greater growth. And this teaches us that our lives require our full and mindful attention. So don't let your time be hijacked by negative emotions or thought patterns that hold you back. Instead, be mindful of the inherent goodness in each moment and consider, how can I make this moment meaningful and impactful in a positive way? Sometimes that's just a smile. Sometimes it's just the way you phrase a text or an email, just adding a little emoji after it. And sometimes it's just reaching across to that person you love who's sitting next to you and just touching their arm. Each and every moment has the opportunity for growth and positive connection. New slide. The final strength that I'm going to focus on today is time management. And this is so important right now. When we're faced with a challenging situation, we need to reorganize our lives and construct a new sense of normalcy. This is so true right now during the pandemic. And many of us are working at home and we have all the challenges of that. And, we might be caregivers of children, of our spouses, of parents. Some of us are supervising online learning for children. We're trying to keep our homes together and, of course, our own mental health. And, of course, we're also separated for our loved ones. And this can cause feelings of isolation and loneliness. And we're worried about our health and that of our loved ones. And then there's toxic news and media, social media, and this can really bring us down. So rather than just doing things without reflection, we can make active and thoughtful choices about how we spend our time. So one strategy for time management is thinking about what's really necessary in my life and what isn't. And we can think about what we do like balls, which we juggle. And the key to successful juggling is, what is glass and what is rubber? So what do we do that can be dropped and picked up later? And what can we do that needs to be juggled? Because if we drop it, it might break. Now, the metaphor of glass and rubber balls, I think it's really useful and I like it a lot. And it's been used in many different contexts. I think I looked it up and quite a few people said they made up this metaphor. But I think it actually seems to originate from Brian Dyson, who was the former CEO of Coca-Cola. And he described juggling these 5 balls that represented different areas of his life. He had work and he had family and he had health and he had friends and he had spiritual. But I don't really like to think of these as spheres of my life. I think it's more helpful to think of these as activities. Because of course our family is a glass ball, but there might be certain activities that we do with our family that are rubber. We don't have to do those activities. So I think, this metaphor helps us consider which activities are important for us to focus on now and which can be dropped for later. So how can you tell the difference between what activities are rubber and which are glass? And the following questions might help you. So you might think, what's the long-term impact of this ball? So if I stop having a healthy lunch every day, will that be okay for me in the short term? What about the long term? And how does this ball help you juggle other balls in your life? So we might not think that exercising every day is really a glass ball. We might think of it as a rubber ball, but actually it might be a glass ball because it helps our mental health and it helps us be an engaged and creative parent. So, it actually might help other areas of our life that we consider glass. And what happens if I drop this ball? Can I pick it up later at a later point in time or not? So we have some friendships that, we can drop and maybe won't talk to them for a year and they'll be fine. And other friendships, we have to check in regularly with those people, or that friendship, may not sustain itself. You can ask yourself, should I be even juggling this ball? So, sometimes we take on responsibilities or activities that we can easily give to somebody else or that maybe nobody even needs to do. And you might ask yourself, are there any things that I've dropped unintentionally? So many of us have gotten out of the habit of doing healthy or positive routines with the pandemic. And, don't forget to pick up those healthy routines every now and then, not to let them drop. So I thought it's really funny that actually I started with the metaphor of a ball and now I'm ending with one. And in truth, I don't think that any of our activities or many of our activities are really glass. Most things we can drop once in a while and they won't break, even those things that are really important. If we miss a work meeting, if we eat an unhealthy dinner, or if we forget to go over spelling words with our children, it'll be okay. But probably more important than what we engage in is how we engage in it. And, so if we yell at our coworker because we're frustrated that we missed that meeting, or if we criticize our spouse for making us that unhealthy dinner, or we shout at our children because they didn't remind us that they had that spelling test, well, that's not okay. And we can think about this as when a couple is under the chuppah and they get married, the groom raises his foot and he smashes the glass. And we're reminded of the destruction of our holy temple and the diaspora of the Jewish people. But we're also reminded of the fragility of human relationships. The human spirit is resilient, but our relationships with others are somewhat less so. Sometimes a single thoughtless act or breach of trust or even an unkind word can shatter a relationship. And our relationships with others are the cornerstone of our resilience, and they should be always prioritized and nurtured. Last slide, please. Or next slide. So let's take a few moments and reflect on what we've been talking about, and also think back to what you wrote in that first exercise. So, in light of today, in light of your own experiences, and in light of all the knowledge that you have about yourself and your life, I want you to ask yourself, what advice would I give to myself right now to boost my own resilience? And how can I utilize all the strengths that I have to build my resilience right now? And what do I still need to work on? What can I work on to help me build up my resilience? And remember that you are the expert of your own life. You can figure out what works for you and what doesn't. You have the experience and the wisdom to guide yourself to the right path. No matter where we live in the world right now, it's challenging for everybody. And we're experiencing a lot of fast paced changes and high degrees of uncertainty. Change is really difficult. It can bring a sense of loss, a sense of insecurity, and a sense of complication. But at the same point in time, change can bring hope for a new beginning, a renewed connection with others, and a greater realization of what is possible and what you can achieve. Your resilience is essential to successfully navigating through this period, as well as any that life presents you that's challenging. So I wish you a huge amount of strength on your journey, and I thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today. And you can just do my last slide if you want. And I just have a last slide, just put the last slide. These are just some endorsements of my book if you're interested. And if you're interested in my book, it also will be available on Feldheim from March 14th, and also hopefully Amazon and your local Jewish bookstore.
Thank you, Leslie. So we're going to open up for a few questions, and you can type in the chat box. You can let us know, raise your hand. Um, so Lois, I think you need to unmute there you go.
Okay. Well, um, I know some people who did a mistake that was so costly, like dive in a pool that wasn't deep enough. And these people are so strong, they're going on with their life and not beating their head up. I mean, every day they're going to be trapped in a wheelchair, because of that one thing. So you've touched on all these things, but what did these people who really did a lifetime mistake, how, what would you say in that sentence or two? Kind of, how are they not beating themselves up, and their families too, because they're trapped in self-care a little bit. But may I say, these people have become better people because of it, and they even have joys they wouldn't have if this hadn't happened.
And that's a great question. I mean, you could definitely talk to them about what's really enabled them to be strong in this situation. And I think when you do talk to people that have experienced such traumatic circumstances, like you said, they're not going to say, is this terrible? They've reinterpreted, and they have a positive outlook on it, and they accept it. There's nothing they can do to change it. And actually actively coping with something is about accepting it and saying, this is what my life is meant to be like, and I'm going to make it the best life that I can, even though it's challenging. Like I said, we all have our challenges. And there's a thing as well. Would you really want someone else's Pekala? Well, probably not, because your own Pekala has made you to who you are today. And you wouldn't want anyone's Pekala, and nobody would want yours. And would you give it up? No, because you know that if you didn't go through those experiences, you wouldn't be who you are. And many times, when you talk, like you said, Louise, when you talk to people who have experienced those events, they don't look at it as traumatic or difficult. You're right. They look at themselves as better, and their lives has improved because of it. And that's really what resilience is. So thank you for that great example.
You're welcome.
So do we have additional questions? I don't see any at this time. Susan, would you like to?
I think John has a question.
John?
Hi there. Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie, for a great talk and some really great reminders, if you will, of some daily tactical ways that we can all address, all of life's challenges. If you could expand just a little bit more about the spiritual connection and your faith in God as a tool to help you change and adapt and demonstrate resilience and grit. Tell us a little bit more about your thoughts about that.
Well, it's a really interesting area of research as well, because there's a lot of research that suggests that religion does boost our resilience. And there's a lot of different ways that it boosts our resilience. So one important way is that it gives us a sense of meaning making. So when we experience something that's really difficult, we know that there's a purpose to it, and we can make meaning out of it. So if we see the world as haphazard and things are just happening to us without any meaning, it's very difficult to go through that life. But if we see that things have meaning and they make sense, and this is our struggle, this is what we have, this is our challenge, that then we're able to deal with it better. And also the other thing about religion is it's quite interesting, because there's a lot of research that shows that religious practices actually also help us with our resilience. And I think that's about having a structure that organizes our day and organizes our life and helps us to to have meaning within each day and each moment. And I wanted to mention one more thing about that as well. Yeah, so I'm sorry. I had another point, but I'm sure I'll think of it in a moment.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for the more detailed explanation.
What's a great book as well is, and I have a few quotes from it, is Man's Search for Meaning. If you haven't read that, John.
Okay, not yet. Man's Search for Meaning is?
Yeah, it's written by someone who went through the Holocaust, and it talks about his own life and how he makes meaning out of his experience. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just have a very resilient group here, I think, Judith.
Yeah, I think so. And Susan, I think, would like to say a few words.
I'm so pleased to be able to end this presentation by saying thank you. Leslie is a sorority sister of mine from Tulane, Roll Wave. And so I was the one who asked Leslie to join us here today. And it was an amazing presentation. I saw other people taking notes. My own personal notes were resilience is the norm. Self-esteem is different than self-kindness. We're resilient, but relationships aren't. And so we need to nurture them and the relationships that are important to us. And the positive self-talk. I mean, it's all just such good stuff. And I can't wait to read your book. And thank you again for being with us all the way from England. I could sense, I could detect a hint of an English accent every once in a while. And I just miss you. And it's so good to see you here today. And thank you again for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was really great. And my book's coming out soon, so it was a wonderful chance to get an opportunity to talk about it. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you later. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.